Welcome to 9works TV. Beside me, the 997 Sport Classic, one of the most unique Porsche 911s of all time, melding some traditional and iconic design hallmarks to a modern 911 framework. Until this came along, the 992 Sport Classic. In today's video, we're lucky enough to have these two unicorn 911s side by side, and we're going to be comparing their similarities and differences. Before we jump behind the wheel of the 997 and the 992 Sport Classics, there's a couple of details that I'd like to point out on both of the cars. Conceptually, it can be argued, they share quite a lot. Let's start with the 997 first of all. I mean, look at it. If you compare the 997 to the 992, I think the 992 looks a little bit awkward at some angles. The 997, by comparison, far more svelte. You can see the double bubble, or as Porsche calls it, the double dome roof on the 997. It was the first of its kind on Porsche 911s. It was said to evoke the Porsche Panamericana concept car. You can see, I'll pop a link here to a video that I've done alongside that car. The stripes going down the middle on the 997, they are stickers on the launch colour or launch theme 992. They are painted on. The colour, Sport Classic Grey. It is a flat colour. It's unique to the 997 Sport Classic, and all 250 examples of the 997 Sport Classic were finished in this colour. The new one, although this is finished in a beautiful shade of paint to sample dark olive green metallic, the launch colour of the 992 is sport grey metallic, so again slightly different to the 997. With the 992, again conceptually fairly similar, albeit this now we're onto a turbo body shell rather than the C4 body shell. So at the back of this car, we're pretty much approaching 2 meters wide now. It is incredibly wide. Porsche has removed, though, the turbo side air vents. We're going to talk more about that later in the video. It has kept the ductile, it has kept the double bubble roof. It has got Fuchs wheels, although for the first and only time as we film, they are centre locking. They are absolutely stunning. Housed within that, you've got Porsche ceramic discs, the same as the 997. Paul here has had the calipers changed from yellow to black to blend in with the bodywork more, which I think is a really smart move. That's kind of it in a nutshell. We'll go for a bit of a drive now and compare how the 997 and its successor in the 992 stacks up on the public road. So, whereas the 997 Sport Classic is based really on the Carrera S, albeit it is heavily, extensively revised, the 992 Sport Classic is based on the 911 Turbo. It's twin turbocharged with the big turbos, not the smaller turbos from the turbocharged Carrera derivatives. However, it's been tuned, or really detuned, this time only putting out 550 horsepower, which is 30 less than the 992 Turbo, and 100 less actually than the 992 Turbo S. All of those engines are 3.7 litres in capacity, by the way. The turbos though, the genuine turbos, they're four-wheel drive and PDK. That is the only way you can spec a turbo these days. The Sport Classic, where it differs and where it gets interesting, is the Sport Classic is rear-wheel drive and manual only. Otherwise, it's got the full arsenal of 992 tech thrown at it here, including the rear axle steering, PDCC with sport chassis, that's dynamic chassis control. Its weight, 1,596, so it is fairly portly, but certainly compared to the 911 Turbo on which this is based, it's a healthy saving really of just over 40 kilos. Helped of course by the fact there's no PDK gearbox or four-wheel drive. The Sport Classic, like the 997, also makes use of lightweight materials to pull the weight down. In 992 form, it means a carbon fibre front bonnet and roof. Does it feel slow or underpowered then? Well, not at all. Not at all. Okay. I've seen elsewhere on the internet a first drive describe this as a 911R. YouTube, it's not a 911R. It's a bit of a silly thing to say. Possibly what it could be looked at is perhaps a GT2 Lite. I mean in the way the power is delivered. The turbos, particularly in the 992 generation, I mean just power for days, but it's delivered in a really smooth and elegant way, befitting the Turbo as the ultimate Grand Tourer. With this, there's a bit more spike to it. There's absolutely no question of that, particularly from 4,000 RPM. Whoa. Jesus, wet, that is relentless. And that's the other thing, the other difference between the 992 Sport Classic over the 7 behind is where this is turbocharged and that's atmospheric, the red line is slightly less at 7 grand rather than 7.5. The shift is excellent. It is the 7-speed gearbox carried over from the Carrera derivatives. The throw is quite short, the throw is quite light, not superficially so. I feel like the weighting and the balance of it is actually really nice considering it is the 7-speed. So really it's the perfect ally to the engine. From the driver's seat, although the footprint very much does feel 992, it does feel big and wide. Looking out of the side mirrors, you don't see those gaping air vents from the turbo body staring back at you. You just see a rear 911 arch that, although is pronounced, doesn't feel as wide as the turbo body with those vents. There's a little bit of a placebo effect or optical illusion there. It kind of makes you feel like this car is perhaps a bit narrower than it actually is. Porsche Exclusive had a lot of reworking to do to make this car. It's not just a case of lump a 7-speed manual gearbox in and take out the front differential. Many parameters have been changed. For example, damping on the car completely revised. Not to mention how the car breathes. We know those side air intakes are gone and all of the intake for the engine now, as is tradition with the Carrera and GTS derivatives, is garnered from the air that whips up and over the roof and into the deck lid behind. The other thing is noise. Now, this being a turbocharged car, we know historically 911 turbos are quite quiet. It sounds fantastic. What I have noticed is driving it in normal mode, as is now, gets very quiet. You could take a business call or heaven forbid talk to a passenger, no problem at all, and it comes across as very refined, very elegant. Turn it into sport, and this is while holding the accelerator in the same position, instantly louder and more of that flat 6 noise permeating into the cabin. And I like that. Again, just gives a dexterity to the car befitting of all occasions. In terms of damping, this is nothing like the GT3 Touring, for example. The GT3 Touring, as a genuine motorsport department car, very stiff. This, it is softer than a GT3 Touring, which again is a good thing because this is very much a road bias car. I really like this Sport Classic. On paper, 1,596 kilos in weight, a width of near on 2 meters at the rear. It's not really attributes you'd associate with a driver's car, but what I love about the Sport Classic is it's got a real dexterity to it. It can do everything. In normal mode, it's quiet, it's refined, it's lavish. It's a great place to be and to go about everyday driving. You then switch it up, and in sport mode, there is a tangible difference between normal and sport mode in terms of sound, which I've mentioned earlier, but also throttle response as well. It really does come alive. So whilst this is a car that you could quite easily drive every day, you can turn the wick up on this and it does deliver. Will bite you if you're not careful. Again, that setup of manual rear-wheel drive turbo, there's plenty of torque just going to the back. It will bite if you don't respect it. And I like that. I think that is what a Porsche sports car should be all about. Plenty of movement there from the chassis. Its power delivery is exceptional. It brings lots of drama and theatre. The nose as well, it just feels so much more direct without the weight being there of normal turbos. It's possibly the most complete 911 from the lineup, really. So how does the 997 Sport Classic compare? Let's get this show on the road with the OG Sport Classic, the 997. Introduced at the Frankfurt Motor Show of 2009, first deliveries came a couple of months later in January 2010. There are only 250 of these for every 5 of those 992 Sport Classics made. There's only one of these 997s on planet Earth, so it's a rare, rare beast indeed. Now, the 997 Sport Classic was introduced alongside the 997 Speedster, introduced to, I quote, bring back the tradition of exclusive small series cars built in very small numbers. As we know, Porsche Exclusive, or Sonderwunsch as it was known in the 1980s, was renowned for its high-end customisation for customers with deep enough pockets. It also created, as Porsche has alluded to there, some low production specials. Think flat nose 930s and then the 993 Turbo S. Now, from that 993 Turbo S introduced in 1998, we had nothing. Porsche Exclusive didn't put its name to any more low number production specials until in 2010, the arrival of the Sport Classic and the Speedster. Internally, quite simply, the 997 Sport Classic is the most lavish place to be. It's probably the very best place you could ever hope to park your bum within the realm of 911s. Absolutely everything is covered in, as you can see, this espresso leather. It's really, really fine. It's really smooth to touch. You've then got these brilliant seat sensors. It's repeated on the door cards as well. Not seen before or since, which is a real shame. And it's thin strips of this fine leather interwoven with yarn. It really does make the most exquisite finish. Leather stitching all around the door pulls. You won't find that, Speedster aside, anywhere else on the 997 range, and to be honest, anywhere since. Even the air vents are covered in leather. So as I say, it's really just a wonderfully appointed interior. Other materials used include aluminium for the gear shifter and the handbrake. Then ahead of me, the binnacles have these silver surrounds, kind of similar to the 40th anniversary car, with this lovely 997 scripts and the twin grey strips, which of course are mimicked up and over the roof and the centre of the car. This all feeds into what Porsche Exclusive said is a love for detail, and it's so evident on this Sport Classic. The 997 Sport Classic was manual only, so that's like the 992. It does have a short shift fitted to it. It's mated to, as I've mentioned, a 3.8 litre flat six with a power kit. It gave an extra 23 horsepower, taking the 997 up to 408 horsepower. Delivered at 7,300 RPM. The red line is 7.5, so it's higher on the 997 than it is, of course, on the turbocharged 992. As ever with Porsche though, it's more than the sum of its parts, and while it's only 23 horsepower on paper, it's the way that power is delivered and introduced that's so special. Other cool bits of specification: it has Sport PASM chassis, the 19-inch Fuchs, mechanical rear LSD and Sport Chrono Package Plus, which again feeds into, and I'm going to quote again from Porsche here, its objective to set new standards in its quality of finish, flair and appearance. Well, Porsche Exclusive from 2010, I'd say you've nailed it. With that in mind, let's go for a drive. The 997 generally feels more mechanical than the 992, and it's perhaps best characterised by its shift. It's just a bit more weight and a bit more feeling when shifting in the 997 compared to the 992. It is a quiet 911, both in terms of induction and exhaust note. It is a bit of a disappointment in that regard because it certainly goes really well. It rides superb. As I've pointed out, there's a real elegance and refinement to the Sport Classic. I am lacking any noise to kind of go with it, and that's a real shame. It's by no means a slouch. It's definitely there to be hustled, especially putting it in sport as I'm in now. There's wonderful punch from that power kit. Again, it's a revvy car, but the power kit just delivers a bit more mid-range thrust, which is a trademark really of those power kits. It requires a slightly different driving style to the 992 in that you have to work harder to get that nose to tuck, but getting it right is really rewarding. It's a fantastic chassis. Again, put it in sport, you really feel the chassis stiffen. It just helps deliver pretty amazing driving experience actually within that more traditional 911 layout. Don't forget the 997 wheelbase is 100mm shorter than the 992. It does feel special to be in here. I've mentioned the lavish interior. You look out the side mirror and you can see that wide body ducktail, cloaked of course in that iconic and compulsory Sport Classic grey. I mean, it looks a lot smaller compared to the 992. You really feel how much narrower it is, which on a tight and twisty country road such as this makes the 997 more of a delight. It's a phenomenal car, and actually if you consider that it was brought out alongside the 997 Speedster, which in my opinion was a bit of a disaster, completely the antithesis of what a Porsche Speedster should be about. This is kind of more of an eye-opener as to what was possible at Porsche Exclusive, delivering a car that is perhaps the ultimate expression of a 911 in terms of sporting prowess and refinement. It does deliver on that handsomely. Could Porsche have gone further with it? Well, yes, but I perhaps feel that with the extra enhancements that the 992 platform brings, such as better active damping, wet mode, rear axle steering, it just makes for more of a compelling all-round package. But from within the realms of 997, this is phenomenal. The more revvy 997 has a totally different power delivery to the 992, and it feels smaller on the road. But the Sport Classics brief is to deliver the best all-round 911 experience. So which is king? Conceptually, the 997 and the 992 do share quite a lot. However, you do get the impression that for the 992, Porsche listens to the criticisms levied by enthusiasts at the 997 that it was special, but perhaps that for all its hand-built genius and quality, it wasn't quite enough. And that's why with the 992, it is a substantial reworking. I really do feel like the Sport Classic concept has been positively refined and perfected. It's by far the prettiest of the current 992 generation. As a 1911 fits all scenarios from the current 992 generation, I think the Sport Classic is it. Peak 911 in the most quintessential and traditional sense of the meaning. Add in its rarity with that numbered production run, not to mention the Porsche Exclusive tag associated with it, and you have, without doubt, an instant classic 911, and perhaps the most compelling 911 of the current 992 generation. My only wish is that more of these would be made for everybody to enjoy.